Outpost Epsilon 7 was not a fortress. It was a medal not tied to the edge of known space. Its purpose was simple: to watch and to listen. It was humanity's most distant eye, floating in the dark and quiet void. On this station, life was routine. The commander, Captain Eva Rostova, knew the shift scheduled better than her own heartbeat. She knew the silence of deep space like a lullaby. But silence, Captain Rostova knew, could be broken without warning, and the breaking was always terrible. The alarm did not scream. It whispered, a deep, cold chime that was only ever used for one threat: large, unknown contacts crossing the borderline. Rostova looked up at the main screen. The quiet hum of the station died in her throat. The system was now displaying shapes that were too large to be asteroids, and too fast to be anything but hostile. They were the color of polished chrome, and they arrived in a silent wave. Not 3 ships, not 10, but an entire fleet. This was the Kroll Empire. On the bridge of the largest chrome warship, General Vrak watched the small, lonely human station approach on his display. Vrak was massive, covered in hard, dark scales, and wore a crown of victory spikes. He smiled, showing many sharp teeth. The Kroll had heard that humans were soft, weak, and too slow to be a true threat. This attack was simply a test, a push against a loose thread in the galaxy. Vrak believed the humans would cry for peace or run away. He saw Outpost Epsilon 7 as a fly he was about to swat. Send the first volley, Vrak ordered, his voice echoing in the Kroll command center. Show them the speed of the Kroll Empire. This will be an easy day. Back on Epsilon 7, the human defenders moved with fast, practiced calm. They were soldiers, but they were also mathematicians. They saw the Kroll numbers, the ship size, and the speed of the advance. They knew instantly what Captain Rostova already understood. They would not win this battle. Their 2 small defense platforms fired a single, desperate round each, mere sparks against the approaching wall of chrome. The Kroll warships didn't slow down. A moment later, 2 bolts of pure energy from the Kroll fleet instantly hit the defense platforms. The platforms did not explode. They simply ceased to exist, turning into blinding flashes of light that vanished into nothing. Rostova's command chair vibrated from the shockwave. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. She did not scream in order to return fire. Instead, she spoke into a headset, her voice low and tight. Protocol Zetanine is now active. All hands cease defensive fire. Prepare the message. Her tactical officer, a young man named Lieutenant Chen, looked back, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. Captain, we can still fight. We can buy time. No, Lieutenant Rostova said, her voice like ice. Time is not for sale. The Kroll have bought something far more expensive than time. Their attack was unprovoked. We do not fight the battle they expect. We simply pay the debt they have chosen to create. She walked to the central communication terminal, ignoring the flashing red lights that now covered every screen. The station was shaking hard now as the Kroll ships moved into perfect firing position. General Vrak watched the silent human station. The human ships had stopped firing. Vrak chuckled. See, they break quickly. They send us no messages of surrender, only silence. Cowards. He raised his clawed hand, ready to give the final order to destroy the main outpost. Just as his hand lowered, a single, clear, artificial voice cut through the Kroll command center. It was not broadcast on an open channel. It was injected directly into the Kroll fleet's primary command network. The sound was cold and completely devoid of emotion, like a machine speaking. It was not a message of surrender. It was not a plea. It was a one-line recording. The robotic voice spoke 3 simple words. The debt is now owed. General Vrak froze. He stared at the screen, then burst into a roar of laughter. His officers joined him, finding the message ridiculous. A debt. Vrak laughed, wiping a tear from his eye. A debt of what? Failure. Foolish humans. They think a meaningless threat can stop us. He shook his head, then gave the final fatal command. Fire and wipe the human stain from our sector. End the outpost. The Kroll ships responded with a devastating focused barrage. In a blinding flash, Outpost Epsilon 7 was gone. The metal knot was undone, replaced by a momentary plume of light, and then the return of deep, empty silence. General Vrak leaned back in his command chair, satisfied. The entire operation had taken less than 7 minutes. He tapped a command on his arm panel, opening a channel to Kroll Prime, the capital world. His voice was smooth with victory. To the Emperor, Outpost Epsilon 7 has been successfully eliminated. That humans are weak and have made only one pathetic threat. We have tested their response and found nothing. We are victorious. Vrak did not know that his reporter celebration of an easy win was the final, devastating mistake of the Kroll Empire. The small, silent station was not their target. It was the tripwire. And the debt, so casually mocked by the Kroll general, was already being prepared for collection. The galaxy held its breath. The destruction of Outpost Epsilon 7, broadcast and celebrated by the Kroll Empire, was an act of brutal, undeniable aggression. The smaller, weaker species that lived near the human borderlands watched their comms channels, waiting for the inevitable roar of the human war machine. They expected massive fleets, angry declarations of war, and chaotic retribution. The normal rules of the cosmos demanded an immediate, violent answer, but the void remained profoundly silent. Earth did not scream in anger. It did not send out fleets. It did not beg for peace. It did absolutely nothing. This lack of response was more unsettling than any battle cry could have been. It was a silence that made every military commander, every planetary ruler, shiver. They all wondered if the Kroll had been right that humanity was weak and broken, or if this terrifying quiet meant something much worse. On Kroll Prime, the capital world of the Kroll Empire, there was no doubt. The atmosphere was thick with celebration and arrogance. General Vrak, the commander who had destroyed Epsilon-7, was hailed as a national hero. The state media played endless loops of the Outpost's destruction. Holograms of the vanishing station filled every public square. The consensus was clear. The attack was a success, and the humans were weak, slow, and pathetic. Even the small, recorded threat, "the debt is now owed," was played for laughs. The Kroll Emperor, inflated with false power, saw an opportunity for total victory. He sent a short, sharp diplomatic message toward Earth, a simple demand for immediate surrender of all human-claimed sectors, and a massive payment of reparations for the resources wasted on their attack. The Kroll believed they had already won the war before Earth even had a chance to reload its weapons. They had tested the line and found nothing but air. However, far from the light of the sun and the noisy broadcasts of Kroll Prime, the true heart of the human response was now in motion, deep under the Earth's crust. Protected by kilometers of rock and advanced anti-scrying technology, was a sterile black room known simply as the Aegis Command. A small group of high-level strategists, not soldiers, but mathematicians and engineers, sat around a dark table on the central screen. The Kroll news report was muted. The image of General Vrak celebrating his victory was ignored. The strategists showed no anger, no panic, and certainly no triumph. Their faces were studies in cold, absolute focus. They didn't even acknowledge the Kroll's demanding diplomatic message. It was already irrelevant. The lead strategist, a woman known only by her designation, Agent Zero, finally spoke, her voice calm and entirely clinical. Epsilon-7 was breached. Protocol Zeta-9 was activated. The Kroll attack has been logged as extinction-level provocation. She used a stylus to touch a single panel on the table. They seek a traditional war, a fleet-and-fleet engagement, followed by talks of surrender. Agent Zero continued. "We are not preparing for a war. We are activating the Gambit." A single light, the color of emerald, came on a separate console. It was the only visible sign that humanity had just initiated a protocol designed not to fight an enemy, but to simply erase them. The silent, calculated response had begun. The Kroll had celebrated their 7-minute victory. Earth had begun its irreversible, silent countdown. Inside the black silence of the Aegis Command Center, Agent Zero stood before her small, focused team. The Kroll's arrogant demand for surrender was still echoing faintly in the background, a noise they ignored completely. For the humans in this room, the idea of traditional war was a childish game. The Kroll see Epsilon-7 as a victory. Agent Zero began, her voice low. They expect a hot war, a screaming battle, fleets fighting fleets. They expect vengeance fueled by anger. But we do not deal in anger. She paused, letting the heavy silence fill the room. We deal in consequence. She touched the emerald-lit console. We are not preparing for war. We are activating the Gambit. The Gambit is not a military plan. It is a long-term defense protocol. It was created decades ago, not for fighting battles, but for total defense. The human rule was simple, cold, and absolute. Any aggressive attack on a human border outpost triggers an extinction-level response. Epsilon-7 was not just a base. It was a line drawn in the sand. The Kroll had stepped over that line, and now, the automatic system was running. It was irreversible. There would be no warnings, no diplomacy, and no surrender. There was only the debt. Their failure, Agent Zero explained, was believing that our outposts are weak points. They are, in fact, tripwires for the most powerful deterrent we possess. We do not need a fleet for this. The response was launched before the Kroll Empire even knew our name. On the screen, the image changed. It showed a single, tiny vessel floating motionless in the deep outer void, a place billions of kilometers beyond any map. The vessel looked like a dark, silent tear in space, barely a shadow. This was the Harbinger. It had been in space for over 80 years, running on minimum power, waiting for the one specific signal, Protocol Zeta-9. The attack on Epsilon-7, the Harbinger, Agent Zero said, a hint of something metallic in her tone, is not a warship. It is the delivery system for the payment. It is coated in material that absorbs all known energy signatures. It has no engine plume, no heat signature, and it runs completely silent. It is, to the Kroll, completely untraceable. She zoomed the image onto the ship's nose. It carried a small, heavy payload, not a missile, but a singular, complex device. This is the weapon, she stated. It does not use explosions or radiation. It is a matter disruption device. It is designed to create a chain reaction that attacks the very structure of a planet from the inside. When deployed, it will not make noise. It will not cause fire. It will simply unbind the planet itself. Agent Zero pressed the final command. The image of the Harbinger on the screen glowed briefly, signaling its awakening. After decades of deep sleep, it was finally alive. The ship turned, slowly, silently, and began its long, lonely journey. Its target was the Crawl homeworld, Crawl Prime. The Crawl believe they have one time to prepare. Agent Zero concluded, staring at the dark screen. In reality, the time we gave them was merely the time required for the delivering. The countdown had begun. The weeks that followed the destruction of Outpost Epsilon 7 were the happiest in the recent history of the Crawl Empire. On Crawl Prime, the sun shone brightly on the proud cities, and the air was calm. General Vrak was now a hero, and the story of his easy victory was taught in schools. The Crawl felt completely safe. Their solar system was a steel shell, protected by millions of active defense drones, massive shield generators, and sensor arrays that could spot any movement hundreds of light years away. They believed their home was untouchable. Why wouldn't they? Earth was silent, and silence, to the Crawl, meant fear. They were waiting for a grand human fleet to arrive, a fleet that would make noise and send out heat, a fleet they could destroy with ease. But nothing came. The Crawl were blind to the true danger because they were looking for a war, and humanity was delivering a simple, perfect execution. Far, far away from the light and noise of Crawl Prime, the Harbinger continued its decades-long mission. It was a perfect piece of machine logic. The ship was coated in a dark, special material that soaked up all forms of energy, making it invisible to even the most sensitive senses. It did not use fire or plasma for its engine. It used a silent, slow, gravitational drive that left no trail. It was smaller than a small transport ship, but it carried the weight of an entire world's fate. The Harbinger was not driven by a crew. Its navigation was based on a fixed, cold logic, updated only once by Agent Zero's final command. It was the galaxy's most silent, patient hunter. It passed through empty, dark regions of space, moving with a grace that was chilling in its purpose. Back in the underground silence of the Aegis command, Agent Zero and her team were simply watching the dots on their internal screen. The Crawl knew nothing of this room, nothing of the simple mathematics that dictated their fate. The strategists were not celebrating the Crawl's arrogance. They simply noted it as an expected variable. The long wait was never a sign of weakness. It was the necessary delay required for the Harbinger to travel the distance and arrive at the perfect, unannounced moment. Final staging point reached, a low voice reported in the command center. Agent Zero looked at the screen. The small dot representing the Harbinger was now at the precise spot in deep space, ready for the final, critical jump. This jump would take it past the outer defenses of the Crawl solar system in a single, silent burst. Confirmation of trajectory lock on Crawl Prime's gravitational center, Agent Zero confirmed. She looked at the timer on her console. It glowed a cold, deep red. 72 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds. The Crawl's confidence is at its peak. Their sense of vigilance is low, Agent Zero stated, her voice flat. It is the perfect moment for the payment to be delivered. In exactly 3 days, 72 hours, the silent ship would make its final move. 3 days of celebration remained for the Crawl Empire. They had tested the thread, and the thread had pulled back, silently and perfectly, dragging the ultimate consequence toward their unsuspecting home. The unseen hunter was at the door, and no one knew it was knocking. The atmosphere on Crawl Prime was thick with confident pride. Weeks had passed since the easy destruction of Outpost Epsilon 7. General Vrak had been promoted, and was now overseeing the defense of the capital, a job he considered a lazy, well-earned rest. Why worry? The human threat was a silly joke. The Crawl solar system was protected by layers of massive, orbiting defense platforms, automated patrol fleets, and sensor networks that could detect a speck of dust moving too fast at the system edge. Vrak sat in the glorious command citadel, bored by the peace. He was watching a beautiful holographic display of the Crawl homeworld. He truly believed his work was done. Then, the alarms began. It was not the deep, cold chime that indicated a large, aggressive fleet. Instead, it was a sharp, high-pitched pinger sound, the defense system used for anomalous signatures, a signal that something was there. But the computers could not understand what it was. The lead Crawl sensor officer, Commander Zith, frowned deeply at his terminal. General, a contact. It has just appeared deep inside the 9th perimeter. Location, Sector for Alpha. It bypassed every single jump point sensor. Vrak was irritated and did not even look up from his desk. What is it, Zith? A lost trader. A sensor error. Negative. General Zith replied, his voice strained. It is a vessel, but it is tiny, smaller than a civilian shuttle, and it shows no heat signature, no engine plume, and 0 energy output. Our system flagged it as a ghost object that should not be able to exist, let alone travel. Vrak finally looked at the main screen. The object was barely visible, a small, dark shadow moving with chilling, silent speed directly toward Crawl Prime. It was so small, it should have been nothing. Vrak laughed, a harsh, grating sound. This is the great human revenge. They send us a single scout drone. Send out Patrol Squadron 3 to vaporize it instantly. Do not waste my time with this nonsense. But Zith hesitated, his dark scales turning pale. General, the ship's speed. It is traveling at maximum efficiency. It's not maneuvering. It is on a direct, unchangeable course toward the planet's capital city coordinates. It is running completely cold, yet it is moving. Vrak felt a sudden deep coldness in his gut, a fear he hadn't felt in decades. He stared at the screen, and the shape of the object, so silent and dark, seemed to grow larger in his mind. It was too simple, too clean. It was a single, perfect, dark arrow pointed straight at the heart of their entire civilization. He tried to force himself to remember the battle at Epsilon 7. The humans had not been angry, they had been quiet. He heard the robotic voice again in his mind, cold and absolute. The debt is now owed. Vrak's face, usually arrogant and smiling, went instantly slack. The easy victory at Epsilon 7, the celebration. The weeks of silent waiting, it all rushed back. But now, it was framed by the dark shadow on the screen. He understood the cold, powerful logic of it all. The humans hadn't been defeated. They had simply been waiting for the payment to be delivered. Stop laughing. Vrak suddenly roared at his confused officers. His clawed hands slammed down on his console. Recall Patrol Squadron 3. Do not approach that ship. That is not a drone. That is the human response. That is the debt being collected. A wave of confusion and immediate panic exploded in the Citadel. The officers couldn't understand why the great general was running from a small shuttle, but Vrak was already screaming orders to deploy the planetary shields, activate every long-range weapon system, focus fire on that object. Now, the Kroll defenses, the most powerful in the sector, began to roar to life. Thousands of missiles were launched, and energy cannons charged, but they were too late. The Harbinger was already too close, moving with the pre-programmed perfection of a machine that had been asleep for 80 years and knew only its final, single-purpose dot. It was not designed to be detected, and it was not designed to be stopped. It was simply the quiet, unstoppable consequence of one moment of arrogance by General Vrak weeks ago. That humans had not sent a fleet to fight a battle. They had sent a silent assassin to finish the war before it could even begin. The small, dark tear in space did not slow down. It was within the upper atmosphere, just kilometers above the thick cloud layer of Kroll Prime. Vrak looked at the screen, seeing the shadow grow, knowing that he had caused this. He had found the loose thread, and by pulling it he had unraveled everything. The final movement came from the tiny single hatch on the nose of the Harbinger, which silently slid open. The payload was prepared for delivery. The debt was about to be paid in full. But the Harbinger was not built to fight. It was built to deliver. It moved with the cold logic of fate, immune to the fear and chaos happening around it. The Kroll weapons passed right through the ship's stealth field, missing the dark body completely, only succeeding in burning holes in the beautiful blue sky of Kroll Prime. The powerful defense network, designed for a noisy warship, was useless against a silent, single arrow. The moment the small, heavy payload was released from the Harbinger's nose, the main ship completed its mission and began its slow, silent turn away from the doomed planet. The payload, a metallic sphere no bigger than a Kroll's fist, continued its descent, falling with simple gravity. It passed through the atmosphere. It did not explode, and it did not burn. It was just a small, silver object falling toward the capital city. In the Citadel, General Vrak watched the screen. His mouth was open in a silent, desperate cry. Stop it. Stop it. What is it doing? Why is there no blast? He finally understood that the humans did not deal in explosions. They dealt in perfect consequence. The payload disappeared beneath the thick cloud layer, and then the silence returned. Heavier and colder than before. It lasted only 10 heartbeats. Then Kroll Prime began to die. There was no sound, no great flash of light, and no sudden fire. Instead, the entire planet's surface began to break. Fault lines appeared, not in the empty lands, but slicing straight through the heart of the capital city and across continents. The ground did not shake. It simply and smoothly tore open. Massive skyscraper towers, once symbols of Kroll pride, began to tilt, then sink cleanly into the widening cracks in the ground. The oceans, once calm and blue, started to drain into chasms that opened on the seafloor, disappearing into the planet's core. The Kroll fleet, still orbiting Kroll Prime, watched in horror. The structural failure was happening everywhere at once. It was not a battle. It was a complete, structural collapse. The matter disruption device, released deep inside the planet, that had begun to unbind the very stone, steel, and water that made up the world. From orbit, the beautiful blue and green planet became a mosaic of broken pieces. Mountains folded in on themselves, and continents shifted like ice floes breaking up in a sea. The air rushed out into the vacuum of space through thousands of fissures. The lights of the proud cities went out one by one, not with a bang, but with a horrifying sigh as they simply lost their foundations. General Vrak stared at the main view screen. Kroll Prime was gone, replaced by a dense, quickly expanding cloud of planetary dust and debris. His homeworld, his empire, his victory all erased by a single, silent, cold arrow of human logic. The debt had been paid. The cost of a 7-minute battle was the loss of an entire civilization. The silence that followed was absolute. The Kroll Empire had been silenced by the terrible, quiet consequence of the human revenge Gambit. The chaos in the Kroll solar system was not the sound of fire and explosions. It was the silent terror of gravity and vacuum. The ships of the Kroll fleet, which had proudly protected their capital, now floated aimlessly, watching the spot where their planet, Kroll Prime, used to be. It was just a massive, dusty cloud now, slowly expanding, a memorial to their arrogance. The Emperor was gone. The capital city was gone. The entire Kroll civilization had been erased by a single, small silver object. The surviving Kroll officers looked at the debris, their minds completely broken by the impossible. Quiet destruction. Far, far away. Deep under the Earth's surface in the Aegis Command, Agent Zero watched the final data flow. The small dot representing the Harbinger was already on its way back to its deep space storage point. Its single, cold purpose complete. The entire operation from the moment the Kroll fired the first shot to the destruction of their world had been a simple, perfect equation. The room was quiet, professional, and entirely free of celebration. Confirmation of structural collapse is 100%, a technician reported, his voice flat. The matter disruption effect is stable. The planetary debris cloud poses no threat. Agent Zero nodded. The tactical display showed the location of the few surviving Kroll military vessels. They were scattered and paralyzed by shock. It was time for the final piece of the Gambit. She touched a panel marked Galactic Broadcast. This message was not just for the Kroll. It was for every species in the galaxy that had watched Earth's silence and mistaken it for weakness. The same cold, the mechanical voice that had sent the one-line threat to General Vrak weeks ago now spoke across every known communication channel, reaching the paralyzed Kroll ships, the nervous nearby empires, and every hidden listening post in the void. The voice was clear, simple, and terrifying in its lack of passion. Attention. This message is from the human government of Earth. It paused, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. The Kroll fleet remained motionless, every monitor showing the cloud of dust that was their home. You witnessed the destruction of Outpost Epsilon 7, the voice continued. That attack was unprovoked. That attack was logged as a debt of extinction. This action you see now, the dismantling of Kroll Prime, was not war. War is messy and wasteful. This was a consequence. This was a payment. You tested our border. You found the price. That human people do not fight for honor or revenge. We fight for security. Our defensive strategy is simple. Attack a human border and your civilization will be erased. No negotiations. No second chances. No surrender accepted. The message was brutally short, cutting through all the Kroll's complex ideas of military strategy. Our outposts are not bases. They are not points of weakness. They are the start of an irreversible process. You chose the debt. We have collected it in full. The silent Kroll ships were now completely alone in the dark. Their civilization was a cloud of dust, and their warning was already traveling at the speed of light to every corner of the galaxy. Humanity had not sent a warning. They had sent an example. The final words of the broadcast were the coldest warning the galaxy had ever heard. You will never cross a human border again. The payment is complete. The simple, mechanical words of Agent Zero's final broadcast echoed across the galaxy. The message was shared millions of times within minutes. Every diplomatic corps, every military commander, and every petty tyrant heard the cold explanation for the event. They did not hear a declaration of war. They heard a chilling statement of fact. This was a payment, and the Kroll had paid the full price. Every alien species who had watched Earth's silence and mistaken it for fear now understood their mistake. The humans were not afraid of chaos. They simply considered it inefficient. They did not deal in small fights. They dealt in absolute, total consequence. The species that had been considering minor attacks on human mining operations, or small incursions into human space, immediately cancelled those plans. The thought of facing the matter disruption device, the thought of their own world being silently unbound, was a fear far deeper than any weapon fire could cause. The power dynamic in the galaxy changed in a single, silent moment. Earth was not just respected, it was suddenly the most terrifying power in the known void. The Kroll Empire, once a large, loud and proud civilization, was now only a warning dot in the Kroll solar system. The remaining ships of the Kroll fleet, those far enough away to survive, made no attempts to fight or regroup. They were too broken to act. They simply drifted among the expanding cloud of dust that was once their home. They had learned the bitter truth. When humanity drew a line, that line was absolute. They had not been defeated by a superior army, but by a superior mathematics. The human-controlled sectors of space settled into a deep, immediate peace. No one approached the borders. No one sent probes. No one made threats. The silence that now covered the human borders was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of respect. Back in the black silence of the Aegis Command, Agent Zero watched the final reports come in. Her team was already planning for the next 80 years of deep space readiness. The entire team showed the same cold, quiet focus. They were not monsters. They were protectors. They had executed a difficult, terrible duty to ensure the complete safety of their own world. The destruction of Kral Prime was the ultimate insurance policy. The galactic cartographers, nervously updating their maps, designated the expanding dust cloud where Kral Prime once orbited as a permanent marker. It was officially called the debris field of the first debt. But the local populations, the nearby species who now feared and respected humanity, had their own name for it: the Memorial of Rack's Folly. It was a monument to a general's arrogant 7-minute victory that had cost him his entire civilization. Humanity, having delivered the ultimate consequence, retreated back into its sphere. They built no new bases, sent out no massive fleets, and made no further demands. They simply went quiet again, leaving the galaxy to deal with the terrifying, unshakable memory of what happened when an outpost was attacked. The final message was now written across the dark canvas of space. Carved out of a destroyed planet, the humans do not start fights, but they always finish them, and the cost of the first shot is always paid in full. The galaxy had learned the terrible cost of crossing a silent line, and for now, that was enough.